It's a privilege to share a platform with Gigi this evening. Many people follow her online, and I think the Western media and commentators like to portray Gigi and others like her as really just being part of a Twitter generation, just interested in their Blackberries, have no ideology, just commenting on the situation. And I think anybody who knows her and knows the organisation she's from knows that this is far from the truth. And in fact, when famously during the 18 days Jeremy Paxman put it to her that really there was no political ideology in the revolution, she soon put him right by saying, well, I'm a revolutionary socialist, which actually made them all look gobsmacked in the studio and made a lot of us cheer. I think that we should be under no illusions that to write people off as a Twitter generation who really are only commenting absolutely underestimates the stakes that socialists who play a role in the revolution take on. The stakes are high. And it's not a game. They are in the middle of a life and death struggle for the future of the revolution, all of those activists, and I think, therefore, it is truly a privilege to have Gigi with us, and we're grateful that she's taken time out of what are still incredible events to come and speak to us tonight. Because the events in Egypt, they've just been an inspiration, not just here in Britain, but around the world for people who are struggling to change society. And I think if you think of the process of revolution that began with Mohamed Bouazizi setting himself on fire in despair in Tunisia, it set off a wave of struggles and revolutions which will shape the 21st century. It's no less than that. I think that sense of struggles at which Egypt is at its heart. Egypt is the centre of it. What happens in Egypt will shape everything. Now, sometimes the media ignores Egypt. We only hear about it when people are being shot in the street. And sadly, that has happened quite often over the last 12 months. But actually, some of the struggles that go unnoticed, the huge struggles of workers, the huge struggles of some of the poorest in society, have been happening throughout this process. And Egypt shapes everything, not just because of its sheer size of its population, but of the sheer power of the working class in that country. And if it shapes everything in the region, really, the region then shapes what's going on in the globe because of the strategic importance of that region for the world. Because what we saw, didn't we, was really those revolutions, and Egypt in particular, shook the Western ruling class, didn't they? This was the Western imperialism that thought it could use the Arab people as their puppets, as their tools to further their own interests, were suddenly getting the masses turning around and giving them two fingers. And remember, the West hung on to the dictators till the last possible moment. Let's not forget that. Now they're going parading around saying they're the friend of the revolution. But it was Tony Blair who was talking about the Mubarak. It was Hillary Clinton who was saying this could all be sorted out. These people backed the dictators virtually until Ben Ali was getting on a plane, until it was clear that Mubarak wasn't going to carry on any longer. And the idea that they could pretend to be the friend. They backed Mubarak with money, with deals. It was US-made tear gas that was being thrown at the protesters. We've all got photographs of them. I saw them in the street myself. It's US dollars that backed the army that kept them in power and still manages to send money over to them. And what about the people of Bahrain, who ended up being crushed by the Saudi Arabian forces, who are still backed by the West? So they are no friend of revolution. And so when I see them saying that Western intervention helped in the Libyan revolution, when I see that they might consider Western intervention into the Syrian revolution, we have to be saying they are no friends of revolution, and no Western intervention can ever help an ordinary people come to power and get democracy. And I think when it comes to this last week in Egypt, Parliament sat for the first time last week. We do again hear a lot of people in the West whittering on about how there's now going to be stability. Now they've got democracy. We were told that Arabs couldn't have democracy. I remember famously one ex-British ambassador on Newsnight saying this. But they've got democracy. This means there'll be stability, normality, and it's all going to go back to normal. But actually, this last extraordinary week in Egypt shows this is far from the truth. Because last week was not just some anniversary march. It's opened up a new phase in the revolution. And I think that when you see, we always talk about revolution being a process, but within this process, there's also sharp breaks. And I think this last week is another one of those. It only took 18 days to bring down a dictator who had ruled for almost 3 decades. But what I was told on the streets of Cairo time after time last week was we need to complete our revolution. We haven't finished. We haven't got what we fought for. We haven't got what people died for. In fact, some people said we need a second revolution. One young man said to me, we're going to be better at it this time around. We know who our enemies are. We know who our friends are. We've learned a lot in the last year. Now we can make a real revolution. And one young guy came up to me and pulled out of his bag a blood-stained T-shirt. He said, I wore this T-shirt on the 28th of January last year. People around me died. There is no way that I'm just going to celebrate and then depart. And that was the sense you got on the streets. And actually, what did we see last Wednesday on the anniversary of 25th? More people mobilised across Egypt on the streets than at any point during the revolution. Tens of thousands in local feeder marches. I tried to meet up with Gigi and Hossam Halamawai on the march from Giza, but it was a local feeder march coming in. It was so big, I never saw them on it. It was just enormous. Tens of thousands of people on just one of them. And in fact, Tahrir was so crammed that many people never got into it. Now, it's a huge, enormous thing. It's not Trafalgar Square. Tahrir is enormous. And yet people may have seen online some of the photographs, the aerial photographs, just to give a sense. And this was the picture throughout the country. This was not just Cairo. This is something that reaches in to even some of the smallest places. All ages, women and men, all religions and none coming out in the streets. But it wasn't just the numbers. It was the political slogans. It was the political ideas behind the people that came out last week was phenomenal. The anti-SCAF, the military council, anti-the army. The idea, the slogans that had been used against Mubarak, now just slotted in Tantawi, now just slotted in the army council. That sense of, actually, many people at the beginning of the year were saying, the army and the people one hand. You didn't hear that last week. In fact, you know, when people they're selling flip-flops and slippers in the square with the faces of Mubarak and Tantawi on them so that you could show your disgust by buying them and walking on them the whole time. And that sense of now it's just become a different regime with different names in it. The idea that these things are the same and they have to be battled in the same way, that they need a revolution to bring them down, was absolutely phenomenal. A deep bitterness. Mubarak is gone, but his system still remains, time and time again. And so therefore, I think what we're seeing is a deepening of the revolution over the last week. If you think of the repression that people have stood up against, and I'm sure you can see in some of the photographs, it has only served to harden the resolve, it seems, of the revolutionaries. It hasn't intimidated. In fact, the propaganda for weeks before the 25th was that Egypt was going to burn down. And in fact, if it was going to burn down, it was going to be the Revolutionary Socialists who would do it. That was the propaganda that was coming out of the SCAF in the weeks leading up to the 25th. But that did not intimidate people. And it seems that even when they try to crush with repression, that actually more people come out. I mean, in one of these images is the image of the woman who was beaten in the street and her veil stripped off her and her body open and being kicked. It was just horrific in any society, in any place this would be horrific. But what did it do? Did it mean that women weren't coming out in the streets? As Mark said, women have been at the heart of this revolution and of the others across the region. And actually what it saw was one of, as I understand it, one of the biggest demonstrations of women, and to say that we have a right to protest, we're still going to be part of this revolution. Absolutely courageous. When you think what's happened, one woman taking SCAF to court for supposedly having virginity testing, which is effectively sexual assault, a public sexual assault in front of other soldiers. Incredibly courageous from a conservative family and a conservative time to do this. And I think this shows how the revolution has gone to the heart of society, is changing people even as they change society themselves. And therefore, when you look at that, them trying to divide the revolution, the other way that SCAF and the ruling class have tried to divide the revolution is by religion, isn't it? When you saw at Maspero in October, the Christian Copts who were murdered. And when you look at the unity, I mean, I just find it absolutely awe-inspiring to see people carrying a Quran and a Bible to show the unity. And on Friday in Tahrir, I was going around with a socialist, Wasim Wajidi, which some of you may know, and he was translating for me, and we saw a Muslim family go by. And one of the things that's lovely this week was seeing people have produced masks, and maybe you can talk about it, of the martyrs, of the people who've died in the revolution, with their names, so different people, so to remember them. In fact, the feeder martyrs on Friday were dedicated, each of them, to a different martyr. And this Muslim family, the young girl, she must have been about 13 or 14, had the mask of Mina Danielle, and Mina is a Christian Cop, was a Christian Cop. And we went up and talked to her and said, do you know who he is? We didn't know if she just randomly picked up one of the masks. And she said, oh, I do. And we were saying, well, he's a Christian, isn't he? And she went, yes, I know. And we said, so what made you choose this mask? And she said, well, when our family were choosing the mask at the beginning of the demonstration, my sister chose a mask of Khaled Saeed, and he was the blogger who was murdered by the police, and actually one of the causes, if you like, one of the reasons that people got organised in the months leading up to the revolution. And she said, so therefore I thought I would choose Mina. Because I wanted to send a message that there was no difference between a Christian and a Muslim. And from a young teenager, I just thought that's absolutely tremendous and shows just really the spirit, if you like, of unity, of solidarity, of the potential of humanity to overcome everything that the regime and the system wants to throw at them, that it can be overcome. And I think that spirit of what a revolution, the sort of liberatory nature of even just the struggle, is something that has transformed people, and I think it's absolutely tremendous. And to be honest, it's tremendous to even witness just a glimpse of it over the past week and earlier in the year. And I think that therefore, when you then look at people who say now they've got a parliament, it's all going to calm down, they have no idea about what this revolution really is about. Now, it's clear people believe that the parliament is an achievement, and it is an enormous achievement. And there are people who have hopes that it will bring something different. But actually, right now, people see the SCAF, the military, as just being like this with the parliament. And therefore, the SCAF want to say that everybody who still protests are thugs, that everybody is somebody who's going to bring violence and shouldn't be seen as part of the revolution. And actually, you've got this huge contradiction now with the parliament, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it. But actually, the Muslim Brotherhood have won a majority. This is an organisation that has deep roots in organisation throughout Egyptian society. They have been illegal and have been repressed under Mubarak, and therefore a situation where you'd think that they would at least have what we would often call here in British politics a honeymoon period, where people might say, let's see what they do, let's give them a chance. Now, of course, there is some who are saying this, but I tell you what, astonishing scenes last week in Tahrir Square and on Friday about people feeling already the illusions of the idea that actually the Brotherhood in Parliament were going to change things for them, becoming evaporated so fast. And I think that when you look at it, because often, again, the media here is saying, oh, the revolution was, well, effectively they say maybe it was won by the army, and now they say it was won by the Islamists. And no sense of the mass of ordinary people fighting and winning, and actually being hijacked at various times by sections of a new ruling class. But actually, we have to look and say, what is going to happen now? The contradictions of a parliament that isn't going to be able to deliver for ordinary people what they made a revolution to get opens up all new possibilities of where the struggle can go. Because what happens about food prices? What happens about wages? Egypt is in the middle of an economic crisis which is linked into the global economic crisis, which is actually part of where the revolution came from in the first place, was despair at the future and people not having any chance to get a decent job and an income. So therefore, what will happen? I mean, people are even talking about austerity in Egypt, the fact that the government isn't going to be able to deliver austerity in a country where, half the population maybe live on $2 a day? I mean, it's bad enough talking about austerity in Britain, but the idea that this is going to be a solution and people are going to put up with it is something that will expose the contradictions. And also there's the political contradictions for a new parliament. What are they doing about Israel? At the moment they're saying they're agreeing to all the international agreements, which include the Camp David agreement. What are they going to do with America? What about the IMF being allowed in to give loans? We all know what the IMF does to economies. So therefore, on the one hand, there are people with great illusions have been in the Brotherhood and what they're going to deliver, but on the other hand, already facing hostility because people don't believe they're going to deliver. Don't believe they're going to deliver on justice for the martyrs' families, and don't believe they're going to deliver on an economic scale. And what I witnessed was, in the square showed this, because at one stage there was such a hostile crowd in front of the Muslim Brother stage, people shaking their shoes at them. Some even flung their shoes at the stage and then walked in bare feet afterwards to show their disgust and their bitterness that they felt that the Brotherhood were really working hand in glove with SCAF and therefore were becoming part of the old regime. At one point, the Brotherhood played the Quran over the PA to try and calm the crowd down, something which I understand from Gigi would normally work, but then actually a protester went and pulled the plug to try to carry on the protest. And one slogan that will stay with me forever was when a speaker got up from the platform and tried to calm it by going, "We're all Egyptians, Egyptians one hand, we need to go back to the way we used to be." Thousands in the crowd responded time after time, "We will not go back to the way we used to be. We will never go back to the way we used to be. And to hear that, to translate it for me, to hear that booming around the square, that is what a revolution does to people. We're not going to go back in the box. We're not going to end it here. And that's the shift that you've seen. This is a sense that we can see this political upsurge that we've seen in the last weeks can feed into new struggles, can feed into the economic struggles, because the idea that a political revolution can flow and make a social revolution, we can see the potential for this today. When we saw the killer blow to Mubarak, it was when the working class came onto the stage, wasn't it? That's when we saw him finished. And so therefore there is a rising growth of worker struggles, and that sense that then what's happened in this last week can feed into that and give confidence to those workers, which in turn those struggles can give weight and impetus to the political struggles on the streets and the universities as well. That is the sense of where the potential that this can go, because everybody said they fought for more. Everybody said they fought for more, and therefore that sense that this needs to carry on. And I think what is so tremendous, that small as they are, the Revolutionary Socialists have played a vital role in actually arguing for the fact of the power of the working class and what a difference they can make, but being a part of every struggle in the streets, being at the front line in November when the brutal repression came out, that actually there are socialists who've been a part of a Marxist tradition over the years. And people should look online that Hossam Hamalawi is going to be speaking at Marxism this year, and there's a short video clip, it's only 10 minutes or less, when he spoke at Marxism before, and I defy you to watch it without a lump in your throat in terms of what he talked about and his hopes for the future. And really talking about a revolution, I don't believe he for a minute thought that, you know, some years later he might be coming back and speaking in the middle of it. But that sense of what it means. And so I'll end really, because I think we can sit in a room in Yulu and talk about revolution. In fact, to be honest, I've sat in this room many times over the last 25 years and heard people talk about revolution. But actually a sense of a revolution that has pulled millions of ordinary people, some of the poorest and most oppressed and exploited in the world, millions of people into a titanic struggle, not just against a few individual rulers, but against the very system itself. This is what we are witnessing across the globe, and it has sent ripples right across the globe. And therefore, we're in very special times as socialists and activists and revolutionaries, very special times. And it's to get a taste of it tonight that I hope will spur us on for others. And I wanted to say that it has been for me humbling to be lucky enough, if you like, to witness some of this, to be in Cairo at some of these moments, and to meet people, whether it's the man who stood on a stall, a cart selling oranges, with his sign up, and he just said, "There is no dignity for a hungry man." He just stood there with that. Another man holding up the sign of a man who was a friend of his who'd been killed, and I went to talk to him, and he said he just wanted a better Egypt. That's not too much to ask, is it? These are the people who are being pulled into struggle. And one final one, just before I left, I talked to in the square, and he said, "We have not won what we fought for. The poor are still poor. Life has to change. That is what this revolution is about." I'll leave it there.